Organized money.
So we're excited. I think this is our first senator that we've had on the show, Senator Elizabeth Warren. And I go back a long ways with her. So do you, Matt. I know her from the financial crisis. We did a panel about foreclosures like 15 years ago. And what I admire is that she's kind of the same person in terms of who she looks out for. And that's rare. It's rare in politics. It's rare in this country, really. And I'm excited to talk to her about a whole bunch of new stuff here today.
Yeah, just I have known Senator Warren for a long time as well. First met during the financial crisis, but she is probably the most important political figure for the anti-monopoly movement. We'll get into this a little bit. She was the first senator to call for antitrust action against Google, against Amazon, against big companies like that back in 2015, 2016, 2017. And then in her presidential campaign in 2020, she actually came out with a platform to break up big tech. And that led directly into a lot of the Biden world antitrust stuff. So she's, there's a ton. We're going to get into a lot of what she's done, but she has her fingers in lots of policy pies. This is a very annoying analogy, but she is very, there's a lot of politicians that don't really do very much. She is the 100% opposite. And as you said, she's, what she thinks. And that is why she is such an important and polarizing figure and someone who I respect very much.
All right, let's get into it. Organized money. Senator Warren, thank you so much for being on Organized Money.
Oh, thanks for having me. Big fan.
That's what I heard. That you actually you were one of the 8 people who listened to this show. Thank you.
No, come on. It's a much bigger audience than that, but I do. You have done laundry with me. You have taken the dog out with me. There's a lot of stuff we've been doing together for the last many, many months. Yeah. Our dog,
and we didn't even know.
In fact, is also, I think, a fan indirectly because I say things.
Yes.
Like, yeah. Go.
Because we speak at a pitch that only dogs can hear sometimes.
Yeah.
We're both huge fans of yours. You are my favorite senator. And I say that because
and you're going to say that, and then you're going to say low bar. Is that the? Nah.
That's a pretty hack joke. I gotta say, Well, I'm just okay. So speaking of me being rude, I'm going to be argumentative, but it's a sign of respect.
Okay.
Because we got some real problems, and you are someone who is actually thinking, which is very unusual for the Senate or Congress, and so. That's what one of the things I respect about you.
Yeah, go ahead, Matt.
Well, so one of the big things that people want to know about the Democratic Party, right, which is the opposition party right now, is why it's so unpopular. So what is your view?
Look, we clearly have not made the argument forcefully enough that we understand the problem, that costs are just too high for people all across this country, that this is my life's work, that you just can't afford to make it to the end of the month for millions and millions of Americans, that we have real ideas to change that, and that we will get in and fight like hell to get it done. And that's what we've got to do. We just got to do it. Look at it this way. Look at Donald Trump. What was Donald Trump doing a year ago right now, while you and I are meeting right now? Donald Trump was out there saying that on day one, he would lower costs for American families. On day one. And that was the word he kept using. And only he could do it. He would do it on day one. And after he won the election, the very first interview he gave, they came to him and said, the interviewer said, "So, why do you think you won, Mr. Trump?" And he said, "Because I promised to lower costs for American families. I talked about what families wanted to hear about." And now, here we are on what, day 230-ish. I don't actually count.
8,006 is
oh
the
God,
actual
it feels
answer.
like that. Yeah, I know. And the cost of groceries is up, the cost of utilities is up, the cost of housing is up, the cost of healthcare is up, the cost of back to school shoes is up, the cost of backpacks is up, the cost of baby strollers is up, up, up. And for me, that frames this moment and the world going forward
Sure. Sure.
because it's both the politics and the economics. Donald Trump promised one thing that the American people wanted to hear, and he has not delivered. And he not only has not delivered, he's like counter delivered. He's made these things worse.
Sure.
His tariff policies have driven up costs. His energy policies are driving up utility costs. The chaos he is creating is driving up costs. And of course, the big, beautiful bill is really going to drive up the costs on healthcare.
Sure.
So Democrats have this moment in front of us to say, okay, guys, why is it we are Democrats? We are Democrats because we actually do understand the problem. We care about the problem. We have plans to fix the problem, and we will fight for that. And
Right, sure.
This is our all hands on deck moment.
Please like, subscribe, and hit the notification button so that more people can get exposed to organized money. Really appreciate it.
So there is a candidate this year who did exactly that. He focused on exactly those kinds of cost of living issues, affordability crisis issues. And he's now the Democratic nominee for mayor of New York City. And you backed him, you endorsed him, but many of your colleagues in the party have been unwilling to do so. And if Democrats can't support a progressive Democratic nominee, why should any backer of Zoran Mandami support them?
So I think that's the right question to be asking, and one that I have asked in many places and asked less politely than you just did. But
I thought I was being impolite, so
yeah,
that's good.
Me, you can ask that question in an even ruder way. I know that you can.
Matt can do it.
Oh, I can.
It really is a question about how we pulled together as Democrats. People want to talk about what it means to be big tent, how we got a lot of folks in this fight. And there's the answer for me. We got to unite around this economic message. This has got to be the part that this is what we fight for. This is the part we care about. And I get it. We may not all agree on a whole lot of ancillary issues, and God bless to people for whom this is the passionate thing. It feels like that is what they want to hear from the Democrats. I want to hear the slice, that I care about. I want to hear about this part about abortion. I want to hear about these other parts. And God bless, they are important. But as a party, we've got to say we get this economic piece. This is what unites Democrats, and this is what we fight for. We are not in this to fight to make life better for billionaires and to help deregulate and lower taxes for them. We are in this fight to make life more affordable for working people and create more opportunities for people to build real security for themselves and their families.
Okay, so I'm gonna ask you a question to sort of push back on that, but in a not directly, but because I feel like there's a fight that hasn't happened in the Democratic Party that we are not explicit about, that there isn't unity, and it really has to do with the rule of law and fanciness. And so that I'm going to go to the Google decision. There was a big decision yesterday that came out, and I want to talk a little bit about it, and then I want to ask what you think. But this speaks to the rule of law problem and what I would refer to as sort of the fancy elite issue or the Merrick Garland problem. Google was found liable for monopolization last year by Judge Amit Mehta, and we all know this. But yesterday, so that we're taping this on September 3rd, so that's September 2nd, Judge Mehta decided to not do very much to punish them. You can turn on CNBC today, and it's just, big victory for big tech, et cetera, et cetera. And Judge Mehta literally put in a footnote in his decision that the Supreme Court said in precedent monopolization cases that courts have to terminate a monopoly when they find one, but that he was just not going to do so here. Now, Judge Mehta is an Obama appointee. This is not some Trump thing. This is the Trump administration actually bringing the case. I mean, it started under Trump. It really was a Biden case, but Trump continued to bring it. And then an Obama appointee essentially just lets Google get away with monopoly. Would you agree that that's a form of lawlessness? And how can I tell anybody that we do have the rule of law in America with that? And then how can I genuinely, convincingly talk to them about the fact that costs are going up because of big corporations and Democrats are really going to take them on when this kind of thing is going on?
Okay, so I think you and I are fighting the same fight.
Right.
And that is, who exactly do you think government's supposed to work for? Right?
Right.
And let's be clear here. Republicans know who they think government is supposed to work for. I think of this as kind of the Mitt Romney example, right? Corporations are people too, and it's our job to get out there and defend them, right? And we know that from decades and decades and decades of history. Democrats have a push and pull in here. Is government here to help the wealthy and well-connected, or is government here to help the 99%, the tens of millions, hundreds of millions of working people in this country who work hard, play by the rules, and don't have $1 bazillion to donate to a political campaign? Can we make government work for them? And I think there is a range of difference in our party over that. And one of the things I do is I fight, I was going to say relentlessly, maybe I should say persistently, with my own colleagues to pull us in that direction. And I think there has been real movement. But has there been as much movement as we need? No. Do I want to see more? Yes. And this is the fight, man. Who do you make government work for?
I remember when I met you, I think it was like 2009, 2010, we were on a panel together, and it was about the foreclosure crisis. And we were talking about these same exact issues. You know, who's the government supposed to work for? And I mean, you know, it says something about the rule of law in America that Luigi Mangione has a fan club. And I think you've talked about this, the fact that in the absence of real accountability, you get disorder, you get social unrest. And that's the danger. When you talk to your colleagues about that, is that something that might get through to that? Like, it's weird to both sides, the rule of law. Like, I don't understand it. So just tell me how those conversations go.
So let me back up. You actually put something in my mind that I hadn't thought about for years, David, when you remind me about when we met. You remember I did the congressional oversight panel, and then Dodd-Frank goes through. And when Dodd-Frank goes through, I end up as an assistant to the Secretary of the Treasury, Timothy Geithner, and to Barack Obama. Remember?
Fine man.
To set up the CFPB. And I still remember the day that I'm sitting with Geithner and a bunch of other people, and the crash is still going. Actually, it's before the CFPB. I got that a little wrong on the timing. So we're in the middle of the crash. You guys get this right on the tape. Okay, so the economy has crashed. Let me start this over. The economy has crashed. The Congressional Oversight Panel is this group that I'm leading that's supposed to have oversight over the bailout. And we meet with Secretary Geithner, Secretary of the Treasury. And he does this blah, 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 blah forever so that you can't really get any questions in. And finally, I just interrupt him and say, look, I appreciate all this, Mr. Secretary, but here's the problem. We can now see that somewhere around 10 million Americans are going to lose their homes.
Right.
and millions more are going to lose their jobs, millions more are going to lose their pensions. And I just went straight into the data about what this means. Entire cities are going to be wiped out. Neighborhoods are going to be wiped out. Little towns, big cities, states across the country where it's going to be hard. I am totally, you can imagine me, totally wound up on this point. And I said, 10 million people losing their homes. And Geithner looks back at me and says, in effect, calm down. We have also run the numbers, and the banks will survive. I'm like, the who? And to me, that's the whole game is right there. If you're watching 10 million people lose their homes, is it that you worry a lot about 10 million people, or do you worry a lot about the largest financial institutions whose collateral is rapidly losing value? And I want to be clear here. People, Tim Geithner, Larry Summers, and others, Robert Rubin, people who had very powerful positions in government and in the Democratic Party, believed that the way you saved the American economy is you flooded money into those banks, into those big financial institutions. I believe, and I was certainly not alone, that the right way to do it was to focus on the people who are losing their houses and flood our assistance there. That back and forth has not gone away.
Yeah.
But when I came to the United States Senate, we didn't have a lot of people who would talk about what it meant for families that credit card debt was going up and the cost of a home was going up and that people couldn't make it to the end of the month. And I got to say, we have a whole lot more now, and we have more who are in this fight. And that is my hopeful vision here.
Yeah.
More people are in this fight. And I will say right at this moment, what the Republicans have done over health care, that they've come in and so that they could finance trillions of dollars in giveaways, not just to the richest 1%, to the richest 1/10 of 1%, so that they could finance those tax breaks for the billionaires. They are willing to cut access to health care for 15 million Americans and drive up the cost of health insurance for millions more, to close community hospitals and rural hospitals all across this country. I mean, this is stunning, this kind of shift. And I would say at this moment, man, the Democrats are united. We now get it and are ready to come into this fight and putting a pretty sharp tip on our spear.
So, Senator, you have to come back, because I can tell that we just have a lot to talk about that we're not going to get to. And so now that I have you on the, will you come back? I know
absolutely.
All right, great.
Okay.
Because I want, like, every one of your questions made me want to ask, or comments more than want to ask, like 15 different questions. All right.
Right.
So, okay, so let's get to something that's been in the news that I know you're very thoughtful about. And it's kind of the boss level villain, right? Which is the Federal Reserve. For me, the boss level villain. I have an unusual opinion in the Democratic Party. I'm very skeptical of the Fed. I don't believe in Fed independence. And you have been probably one of the most ardent critics of the current Fed chair. And, let's not forget private equity titan, Jay Powell. So you are one of his main antagonists, and you have been for many years. And you're painfully aware of the decisions that the Fed institutionally, not just the leaders, but institutionally, has made in the interest of Wall Street over ordinary Americans. But there's a big fight right now over Fed independence, and you support Fed independence. Can you explain what that is? And can you explain your position?
Sure. So let's start with, I do not like Jay Powell. Okay, I do not, and we're not breaking news here on your.
You are credible to me, okay?
I
I
do
trust
not
you.
like him, Sam. I am. Okay.
That's exactly right. And this is not breaking news. I actually have said this, and he's probably inferred that from both things I have said to the press, but also things I have asked him in hearings.
He has two first names. Well, I guess Powell's not really. It feels like I don't trust people with two first names.
Okay.
But anyway, go on.
Okay. So, where do you hang out that Powell is a first?
It's not. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah,
I'm
a
wearing
country
like a
club, I
woolen
think.
British
Lord,
jacket.
not in my
Sorry.
neighborhood.
Yeah.
Okay. So, my opposition to Powell is that he has two jobs and he's bad at both of them. One is monetary policy. I have pounded on him for 2 years now to lower the interest rates, lower the cost of credit cards and car loans for consumers all across this country. I think that the data support that. But the bigger one that I pounded on him has been over regulatory policy.
Right.
His view is let the banks do whatever the banks want to do, and has weakened regulation, and weakened regulation, and has cheerleaded. Is that right? As a verb?
Cheerlead.
Cheerled. Oh my God,
Cheerled.
that's right. That he has cheerled look what you guys walked me into.
I don't know.
That he's been out there when the Senate is saying, how could we weaken the rules? And he says, here's ways you can weaken the rules, right?
Yeah.
Over these largest financial institutions. I have referred to him more than once as a dangerous man because I really do believe that puts our economy at much greater risk. And I would just like to say, there's a little bit of evidence that I've been right about that. They weakened the regulations. You remember, he urged the Senate to do that, or Congress to do that, back in 2018. Congress gave the Fed the power to weaken regulations. The Fed then, under Jay Powell's leadership, turned around and did that. I predicted there would be hell to pay. Big financial institutions would fail and they would end up being bailed out. And lo and behold, in 2023, the second, third, and fourth largest bank failures in the history of the United States occurred, including one that quite specifically, SVB Bank, was one that Jay Powell said, no, everything will be fine. They can go ahead and merge with others. It's all going to work out fine. Okay. That's how I feel about Jay Powell. I do everything I can to persuade him to be tougher on regulations. I mean, I also talk to brick walls in my spare time, but I also try to persuade him on interest rates, right? Here's why, and here's the thing, and I ask him about it in hearings, and I say it out loud publicly, and I urge him, and I do the directional stuff on the data. I think all of that is fair game. I persuade, but I do not threaten to fire him. And I cannot threaten to fire him. I don't have the power to fire him, and neither does Donald Trump. And why do I think that's important? I think it's important because of the decision made in 1863. And that is that our first banking regulators are put in place back then. This is the OCC. You may remember it's the same agency we have today. And the key part about the OCC, so here's the United States. We're in the middle of a civil war. We desperately need to stabilize the financial institutions and to be able to finance the war to end slavery in this country. And the concern is if we just pass a law that says the banks have to meet these requirements, it's regulatory stuff at that point, then we know what will happen. Those damn guys are powerful. And they will come call on the senators, or they will call on the reps, or they will call on the president and get access, and they will neuter the watchdog. They will make sure that the watchdogs are weak. So an element of that bill, and to me the most crucial in setting up our financial system, was to say the OCC, the first banking regulator, will be funded independently. That is, they don't come to Congress for their funding. And that has been true for every banking regulator since then. And the idea of Fed independence, which has grown more and taken on its own kind of mystique, right? But the whole thing is premised on that. And that is, you want to get the guys whose job is to regulate really powerful people squinched away from the government. You want to the elected part of the government. You want to move them over and create some distance, because if you don't, it's just plain old government for sale. Government to the highest bidder, and it's open and notorious. So for me, that's the basic principle behind it. I don't like all the decisions the Fed has made. I will do everything I can to try to persuade them. But I want us all to hang on to the idea that the Fed makes its decisions based on its best assessment of the data available to it. May I sometimes roll my eyes and say, I'm not really sure that's what they're doing. But there's a difference between trying to hold them to that standard and just saying, nope, they're just like the Secretary of the Treasury, who serves at the pleasure of the president. And if the president gets his nose out of joint over anything that the Secretary of Treasury has done, he can give him the boot. I don't want him to be able to do that to any of our financial regulators, and especially not the one who's got his hand on the interest rate ticker.
So where does that logic? That's what I think. That's a very probably the most persuasive case for independence of the Fed, but also for the independence of of a lot of different regulatory agencies. Right. But let me ask. But there's bank regulation. We don't want the president, telling the Justice Department go after that guy. But if the president gets the right to choose the attorney general, and then the attorney general legitimately can pursue law breaking, even though he was chosen by an elected leader. So the logic that, you're going to have this institution which is kind of has some insulation from the political branches, and therefore that makes it uncorruptible or less corruptible. Where does that logic stop? Because I could make the argument, well, if that's the case, that the Federal Reserve, there's corruption in bank regulation, and therefore we want to create some insulation from basically elections. Aren't there other areas we'd want to create insulation? Why not do that with fiscal policy? Why not do that with like all sorts of other areas that we are explicitly saying, no, that should be subjected to democratic accountability? Because the other argument here, if you look at, and let me give you my narrative here. So if you look at the 1863 National Banking Act, the bank regulators were actually paid, they were given honorariums by the banks that they regulated in the late 19th century. This is not like super awesome, right? And if you think about, the Federal Reserve since it became independent, Alan Greenspan.
Isn't that what Senator John Sherman said? This is not super awesome. Isn't that the exact? That was a quote, right?
Didn't they carve that ultimately on his tombstone?
He was quoting
awesome lies.
Yeah, not super awesome. This was actually a quote from Lincoln that everybody pretends.
He forget that. People forget that.
But
in fact, Doris Kearns Goodwin wrote a book about that.
Theme of
super awesome rivals.
I'm
sorry. I cut your flow. Go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, sorry.
So Alan Greenspan, the guy's a consultant for Silverado Savings and Loans. It was corrupt, right? And they went under. It was bad. Then he becomes the Fed chair. Ben Bernanke, Janet Yellen, they all go on to millions of speaking fees. And you criticize Jay Powell for what he did, and he made bad decisions, but those were all unanimous decisions, right? Lisa Cook, who is this, I thought her scholarship was great. She's been terrible. She voted for every banking deregulation. They're all terrible. And institutionally, the Fed didn't just lobby for that Silicon Valley Bank loophole bill. The Fed, the general counsel of the Fed wrote it. And there's a long history here since the Fed became independent in the 80s of the Fed institutionally doing evil things, or actually just having its own political goals. And so there's like a downside, there's a serious downside to independence. And there is an argument, and I think this is the argument I would maintain, which is that if the voters can't access monetary policy through their elected officials, direct control, then isn't that a significant democracy gap? Like, isn't that a problem that, the president can be elected? And this is what Congressman Wright Patman believed. So I'll just cite a person who's dead, and that makes it more impressive.
And you don't have to worry that he steps up and contradicts.
Yeah, he's not gonna be like,
I've got Wright Patman right here, Matt.
Yeah, exactly. But isn't that a problem that you have? Yeah, isn't that a problem that we don't have any way to reach these institutions through our elected officials? And I'll just end this, not really a question, this is more a comment than a question. Trump is going to end up appointing lots of these Fed officials anyway, right? So by the next administration, you could have a Federal Reserve Board that is a majority Trump appointees. This is just from a partisan perspective. And they could stay majority appointees for the entire administration of the next president, whoever that is. And they could sabotage that next president. Is that what we want? Is that a good thing? Because I would say I think it's really important for the president to be able to control the monetary policy in his or her administration.
So look, you're making two arguments that intertwined, and let's just pull them apart a little bit. Part of what you're saying, as I hear you, and correct me if I'm wrong, is, man, have there been some horrible people running the Fed, and do they run it to help out the big banks? And the answer is yeah. And who gets in those jobs? Well, there are people who all the big bankers already know and love. And right, is there too much incestuousness? You bet. Have they all drunk the same Kool-Aid? Yup. There's a lot of that goes on. So I want to start there. But two things on that. One is, even so, sometimes that independence turns out to have had some value. Do you think Volcker would have lasted for a minute and a half, right, doing the stuff he was doing if a president could have fired him, because the president is the one who is directly on the front lines and out there trying to use Fed policy to make it all work the way it's supposed to work? No. In hard times, when somebody's really got to hang on to the steering wheel and say, yeah, I know this totally sucks, we're raising interest rates to cool off the economy. Because remember, I want them to lower interest rates right now, but when you want them to raise interest rates, that's often quite unpopular. Trying to get them to do unpopular things when it's a president who either is taking donations or is worried about what else is happening just in the economy over the next, how many days until the next election, right? That would be lost. So I'm just saying there is some value here that would be lost. The second thing, you're making a democracy point. And how much democracy do we have in a representative government? It's a fair question at every point, right? And it's not that it's special to the Fed. It's something we ask all the time. I only come up for election once every 6 years. I might take a vote next week that would make a lot of people in Massachusetts say, damn that woman, bring her back. Right. So we're always in the push and pull on that. But let me offer my solution, and that is, I not only have been after Jay Powell, I've been after the damn Fed, and have got a bunch of pending legislation. I grant you, I have not been able to get it passed. I came close, and I'm about to come close again. Legislation that makes the Fed more transparent, which would help on some of this, that puts ethics rules in place that would help on some of this, that would make it, there are certain tools I would like to take away from the Fed, because I don't think the Fed ought to have them and have the capacity in its insulated place
So you're saying the Fed should be
shovel money out the door to big financial institutions on the overnight funds, for example.
You're saying the Fed should be more accountable to Congress then?
Yeah.
Like you want to see some lack of independence, but you want Congress to be the locus.
No, it's not lack of independence. Notice what I'm trying to say, David. I want to shrink their toolbox a little bit.
Right.
I want to force them to be more transparent to the American people. Those are kind of the two main areas I'm after the Fed.
Okay. Well, I mean, we could just keep talking about this for a long, long, long time, but I know we have limited time with you, and I want to get to a sort of lightning round of
Sure.
other stuff that we
7.
could talk about. So here we go. Lightning round. This is just
All
quick answers here. Uh, During the CHIPS Act debate, you proposed an amendment to give the government an equity stake in exchange for grants for building semiconductor factories. Donald Trump has now taken a 10% stake in Intel, and he says it's in exchange for those grants. You wrote a letter to the Commerce Department about this, and I want to get your reaction. What changed? What is different now between your amendment and what is actually happening?
All right, so let's jump in the Wayback Machine and remember what was happening in 2022. We were about to do industrial policy in the United States. Woohoo! And that was to make an investment because we wanted to do chips manufacturing here in the United States. And frankly, I thought the Biden administration had made a good case for why that was a good place to start. And so they said, let's go to some chips companies that already have experience doing this, and say to them, we will offer you this big, big barrel of money if you will come, but here's some conditions. You got to build chips. They got to be certain kind of chips. You got to build them here in the United States. You got to use union labor. You got to offer childcare so mamas and daddies will be able to come and work. You got to put them in these 4 states. You can't be doing any of those damn stock buybacks. In other words, a lot of strings around this. What were the strings there for? They were there to say, if you're going to take taxpayer money, you got to make sure that the thing you're producing is our best effort to make it benefit American taxpayers. Good jobs, revitalizing the economy, creating a meaningful supply chain that's onshore, and we don't have to be scared about what happens when this stuff is all overseas. And Bernie and I came along and said, cool, but how about a little upside participation here? If it turns out that this is a super duper deal and it was federal money that helped make this happen. Oh, by the way, I should add, they had to add a lot of money to the pot as well that they spent here in the United States. But for our part for spending money, we'd like a little of the upside just in case if this thing pays off. And by the way, that is what we did back in the 2008 crash when we bailed out the auto industry. Do you remember there were warrants? And we got the warrants. And so we got a little bit of upside participation when we not only saved the auto industry and all those jobs and all that investment in the United States, the American taxpayer made a little on having taken those risks that nobody else wanted to take. So our amendment failed. Okay. Donald Trump comes along and sniffs the air and seems to think there's a deal to be made. Only his deal is very different. What he says is, remember all those restrictions? We want to just dump all those in return for we get a 10% of the action from Intel. So now it's federal money going into Intel. And once you drop all those restrictions, maybe Intel builds over here. Maybe they build in Vietnam. Maybe they hire labor that's unionized. Maybe they, pay the cheapest people they can find. Maybe they put their money in, maybe they don't put their money in, maybe they start doing stock. But in other words, they act like any other damn company that just has money to invest. And now,
you said it's a failing company in that letter.
Yeah. And now we're in a position of saying, look what that does to a market. So if Donald Trump is just a, 2-bit real estate deal maker, then one company has the federal government as its partner, and the more profits it makes, good for the partner, the federal government. The federal government is not your standard partner, right? They have a whole lot of money, and they also control the cops on the beat. So the idea that one competitor in a field has a federal government partner and no restrictions on what it's trying to do here, I think that's deeply troubling. So for me, are there times when it would be appropriate for the federal government to take a a piece of the action when they're putting federal money in? Yeah, you bet.
Yeah.
Would be. But it should be part of, we're trying to drive a particular domestic industrial policy or competitive policy, or like I said, with the auto industry, not Donald Trump's out making deals left and right and then saying to these companies, go maximize your profits. NVIDIA, go sell to China because that's going to make more money now on Donald Trump's watch. That is frankly, a really, really bad place for us to be and bad for competition and people who believe in competitive markets.
Senator, I don't want to nitpick, but this isn't really a lightning round.
Ooh,
What you've
I
done.
talked fast. Doesn't that count for anything? 1.2.
There you
And,
go.
you know,
Then it would be lightning. Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Real quick. Should the Justice Department appeal that Google case? And do you think that Donald Trump, who has been doing favors for big tech overseas, threatening tariffs unless they get rid of taxes and stuff, is he really going to do that?
Yes, they should appeal. And I've given up the Donald Trump prediction business.
Okay, fair enough. Now that's a lightning round. You are on the Armed Services Committee. You have a bill to force the military to be able to repair their own equipment. Why is that important, and is that going to get done?
Okay, how lightning round do you want to be here?
Wait, first, can I give you a high five for that one?
Oh,
High five.
hey, you bet, baby.
All right.
The short version of this is these defense contractors have figured out that they got two big ways to make money. One is to sell you the thing in the first place at a price, and then to sell you all of the repairs and spark plugs and everything that goes into it at a really crazy. I believe in right to repair all across the country. Lena Khan and I had the most fabulous event at Direct Tire and Auto in Massachusetts that talked about what it means that the guy who owns the shop says, I can't repair these cars, many of them because of right to repair, right? That they won't give him access to the information he needs. So this is a particular problem, though, in the military because it undermines our readiness. You've got some submarine out at sea, and it has, I'm trying to remember the numbers on this, 10 giant ovens to be able to cook the food to feed everybody on the ship. 8 of them are down for servicing. And here are these smart nuclear engineer types staring at them and told, you cannot fix it. We are still waiting for weeks for the guys to fly out and do the
ridiculous.
The stories on this are just stunning. How many thousands of dollars the company charges to fly somebody to Japan to meet with the guys in the 7th Fleet to repair a little safety clip that I had a general call me and say, I went in the back room and just built one on my 3D printer. And the whole thing cost 75 cents and took me 15 minutes. And instead, we're spending $60,000, to fly somebody over and do this. So anyway, all of that was not lightning round, but it was a way of saying it's a real problem. And I want to give a shout out to the Secretary of the Army, Dan Twinkle, who understands this problem and pushing back, and also to my partner, Republican Tim Sheehy, who says,
Montana,
we got to do this, and we've gotten this thing onto the NDAA. Now, the industry has figured out what we're up to, and they have moved from, they first just dismissed us with no, we veto that, and found out we've built enough momentum around it, they can't do that. So now they're hoping to amend us to death. In order to do right to repair, you have to do a 10,000-year search of who owned the IP. I exaggerate a little, but trying to tangle us up in red tape and exceptions and definitions so they can litigate. But we're making real progress, and this is a good thing. And if we get it done here, there may be others who will say, why don't we have right to repair?
We'll keep on that. Last question. You had this housing bill that overwhelmingly passed the Senate Banking Committee a few weeks ago. It increases supply, it does a whole bunch of stuff, regulatory stuff. When is your keynote at the next Abundance Conference?
So I love this housing bill. And when you say overwhelmingly, I'm sorry, could I just hear you say the word it passed out of committee unanimously?
Yeah, it was
What's
unanimous.
the
Yeah.
U word there? Yeah, unanimously.
Yeah.
So this bill, let me just do the very short version, is a bill that said the big problem in housing, we need more housing. We have a supply problem. It's not a demand problem, it's a supply problem. And we need millions more units built around the United States. So here's the idea behind it. First is it creates some better tools to get more housing built. For example, some changes in the EPA laws. We met with the groups and figured out how to smooth out some things. So you get faster permitting. Yes, that sounds just like I'm going to speak at the Abundant convention. And it had some other tools and changes, for example, on being able to get financing for manufactured housing. And some really good stuff around that. But the second thing it's got in it is it's actually got carrots and sticks in it. So it's got my innovation fund that says how you build more housing in Boston is not how you're going to build more housing in Phoenix or in Scottsdale or in, start picking your towns. They're different. And the reasons that you run into trouble are different. So here's the proposal. If you locally will figure out how to bring down the cost of building more units and you start delivering on that, we, the federal government, will come in as a partner and help make a bunch of money available to you that you can spend on the ancillary stuff. Like
So it's market crafting and financing and not
it is.
just,
It
hey,
is.
get rid of all the regulations. We're actually going to help you.
It absolutely is. And there's a carrots and sticks on your CDBG money. If you
Right.
are not helping build more housing,
Community development block grant, I
sorry.
should say to people. Yeah.
And that money will be reallocated to the cities and towns that are trying to build a portion to the
Got it.
cities and towns. And here's just back up for 1 minute to 10,000 feet on it. The federal government forever has said we need more housing. I'm decades and decades and decades. And we've all known that. And we've watched the prices go up and up and up. But the federal government has basically said, okay, we'll do what used to be called public housing. And they quit that, gosh, back in the 80s, really, and put a cap on it and let it deteriorate. And the other thing they did is they said, we do financing, which is really, we help make the banks more profitable. And those have been the two roles for the federal government. And just, yeah, little tiny bits of other things, but I mean tiny relative to the size of the problem. This is the first time the federal government will be, if we can get this through, stepping up and saying, if you want to build more housing in your community, here are literally 27 ways that you can do this, and the federal government wants to be a good partner to you locally. There'll be communities that turn their backs on that, so be it. But boy, I met yesterday with a bunch of mayors from around the country, Democrats and Republicans, and man, these are people who want to build more housing and they want a partner. And there's some really innovative, creative stuff on how to do that. Ooh, can I mention one more? Pre-approved plan books. So you get a bunch of plans, building plans, and you say to developers and builders, if you will build that, you can paint it what you want. We'll put but that is the basic structure, and the plumbing and the wiring has all been approved. You're done. You're pre-approved.
Mm.
You're in, and time is money in building, and it's
Sure.
got that kind of stuff all the way.
Okay.
So anyway, really
Great.
exciting possibility. Unanimous.
Well, thank you so much for coming on. I just want to say a couple of things about how awesome you are before you go. But you were the first major political figure to call for antitrust action against big tech.
Yeah.
That's right.
You did it twice and ended up getting a bunch of us fired from a think tank. for that, which was pretty awesome.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
It was a
but you were
blessing.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, you were prescient there. Your Two Income Trap is still one of the best policy books I've ever read. And you know, you've continued this. It's pretty depressing these days, I think, both policy and politics, and both because it feels like, it's a horrible political environment, but also because it feels like the Democrats don't want to change. But then there you are, endorsing and pushing and fighting for Zoran Madami, which is kind of like an acid test. And you're just on the right side. And so that gives me hope. And I just want to thank you for that. And so thanks for joining us. And please come back.
And let me say to you guys, I love that you're out here. I love that you're doing this work. But I want to remind you, just in our little nerdville here about the things we love to talk about, all it took was 4 people to get appointed the last time we had a Democratic president, right? That we had Lena Khan, 2 more people at the FTC, and Jonathan Cantor over at the Department of Justice, right? That's it.
Yep.
4 people, and the entire antitrust world turned around. Now, I get it. It hasn't stuck. I hate this Google so-called
No,
win.
it's a huge deal. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
But I just want to remind everybody that for all the things that Donald Trump is breaking, and he is, and all the things that the spineless Republicans are going along with, and they are, never forget a handful of people can make a damn big difference. And our job is to get out there and get them in a position where they can actually make that difference.
All right.
All right.
Thanks so much for being on the show.
Take care.
Take care.
Money.
I've been struggling with some of the dynamics that Senator Warren was talking about, the Democratic Party, the Federal Reserve. We have sort of differences of views. There is this problem where the old model, I think Senator Warren is working through this model where you have to rely on some institutions. You have to rely on some basic integrity in the Democratic Party, in some basic integrity in, the banking regulatory agencies. And I just don't believe that's there. And
Right.
I think that's a real struggle because, she has to work with these senators. She has to work with these different regulators. And, I can throw in from the peanut gallery, but I do think there is a real debate that needs to happen and that is happening. And kind of, I don't know where it goes because I don't think anybody's been in a situation where there is such an institutional integrity collapse kind of everywhere in our society.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I mean, I guess my view on it is, and I think you concede this, that let's say, okay, we change the Fed structure entirely. The Treasury Secretary is now just like he was before, is now the head of the Fed. I think you and I would both agree that in the near term, in this instance with Donald Trump, very little would change. It would be Wall Street running the show the way Wall Street was running the show, under the independent Fed. And at that point, does that mean that because it would not make an appreciable difference, would it be harder to maintain since you're going to have the same forces saying, oh no, this is terrible. We have to have the Fed be independent. We're going to turn into Turkey. Is Donald Trump the person you want to bet on to make these institutional changes? I guess that's my kind of view on it. But that doesn't preclude the argument that you can have later about what the optimal position should be. I think there's a difference there, and it's something that I think about.
Well, there's betting on Donald Trump, the guy, which I think I didn't vote for him. But then there's betting on the institution of the presidency, right? And he is the elected leader. And I don't like the fact that he was elected, but I do believe that he has legitimacy because he was elected. And so
it's theory versus practice. I completely agree.
Well, I think he'd do a better job than Jay Powell. I honestly do. I mean, if you look at,
there you go.
Senator Warren has been pushing for lower interest rates, and Jay Powell has not, and Donald Trump has been pushing for lower interest rates he kind of has this weird intuitive sense for how the markets work. But I will say, the idea that the Fed needs to do hard things and therefore you can't have the president, in charge, otherwise they won't do hard things. It's like, dude, a banker says, oh, my back itches, and then the Fed is there immediately with a bailout. right? So the idea
That's
that
a hard thing too that they're doing.
yeah, that
right?
they
Like,
give a back rub.
but should
But,
we
you know,
allow that? Should we
no,
be
but
happy about that?
I just don't think. I also am not comfortable with the logic of, well, we can't make hard public policy decisions through our democratic institutions, so let's move away from let's insulate our
Right.
policymakers from democracy. I don't know where that ends, and
Well,
I'm
and
very
I
uncomfortable
think
with it.
I thought it was a really good exchange of views, and I think that to bring it back to more of this crisis within the Democratic Party, there is this long-standing desire on the part of members of Congress or even presidents to disclaim their own power, to say that
Right.
should be in the hands of somebody else. That should
That's
be
right.
something that
The
I am
Green
not
Lantern theory of
involved
the
with.
presidency.
Green
Right.
Lantern theory
Yeah.
of the presidency, or just the way that Congress deals with foreign policy, saying, "Oh, that I want to yell at the president about it, but I don't want to take any responsibility
Well, that I
myself."
mean, like I think it was a huge problem that Biden didn't think inflation was his issue. He was like,
Yeah,
well, that's up to the Fed.
that's
And
up
I
to the
think
Fed. I'm
if
going to push that off. Yeah,
right,
and
and
it's
let me tell you the upside of Trump taking over the Fed and doing a terrible job. We will know who to blame.
well,
The
that's true.
voters will know who to blame, and that is a good thing, right? Right now, they don't know who to blame, and I think
This is the
under
theory
Biden,
around the filibuster, right? That the
yeah,
fact that nothing can get done means both sides can blame each other rather than having some
right.
accountability around it. And if a majority could put their thing, their platform through, like we're seeing in the UK right now, people will reject it because they know, oh, it's Keir Starmer, he's the problem, right? So that's no. I mean, I think there are really important issues that you bring up with this, and it's there's too much on the Democratic side, kind of a cherishing of daddy elites. And I think Senator Warren would really, she was pretty candid about that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we'll see. So anyway, I want to have her back many times because I think we need to continue this conversation. She's really smart too. She knows a ton about policy, and that's unusual for most senators.
Another friend of the show.
Yeah,
So
that's right.
we will be back.